Now, though, to the growing opposition to President Trump's push toward autocracy. Huge crowds took to the streets yesterday to protest ICE operations in Minnesota. In South Portland, Oregon, thousands of protesters marched, covering the blocks around an ICE building. A situation that escalated quickly after federal agents deployed tear gas, pepper balls, rubber bullets, and flashbang grenades into the crowds. And back in Texas, a federal judge has ordered the release of 5-year-old Liam Ramos and his father from a detention facility in the state. You'll remember Liam. He captured national attention. We talked about him on this show a lot after he was detained by ICE agents in Minneapolis last week. In the order issued yesterday, the judge slammed the federal government, saying the case, quote, has its genesis in the ill-conceived and incompetently implemented government pursuit of daily deportation quotas, apparently, even if it requires traumatizing children. But Trump's authoritarian tendencies continue to go unchecked on multiple other fronts. A federal judge in Minnesota has denied a request by the state government and local officials to temporarily block the surge of federal immigration agents. And sources tell MS Now the administration is eyeing Ohio as the next state to expand ICE operations, which are expected to target Haitian immigrants and could begin as early as next week. On top of that, the Trump administration has ramped up its attacks on the First Amendment with the federal indictment of independent journalists Don Lemon and Georgia Fort, following an all-too-familiar pattern of the Justice Department attempting to intimidate Trump's perceived foes. Not to mention, the DOJ appears to be doing Trump's bidding when it comes to conspiracy theories about election fraud. On Wednesday, FBI agents raided a Fulton County, Georgia election office and seized materials related to the 2020 election, including thousands of ballots. So we have a great panel this morning to dig into all of this. Anne Applebaum, staff writer at The Atlantic and host of the Autocracy in America podcast, Douglas Brinkley, presidential historian and professor of history at Rice University, and Adam Serwer, staff writer at The Atlantic. Adam, I want to start with you. Thank you all for being here, first of all. But Adam, I want to start with you because the through line in a lot of the things I just read are Trump and co. deciding and thinking they get to decide who gets the benefit of the entire Constitution and who gets to say that they are an American living in this country. And often the people left out of that are Black and brown people.
Yeah, I mean, this entire immigration operation has been an excuse to violate the 14th Amendment rights of equal protection under the law of people who are not white. I mean, when you talk to folks in Minnesota, there are a lot of folks who have legal status of some kind who are staying home, who are staying out of sight because they're afraid of being profiled by ICE and detained, sent somewhere before, because ICE frequently will, according to reports, ignore people who actually show proof of citizenship in favor of whatever their apps say on their facial recognition apps say on their phone. So if you do not, if there's a possibility that ICE will perceive you as, quote, not as American as a white person, you're at risk of some kind of racial profiling or worse. And I think this is fundamentally an expression of the kind of governance that the Trump administration wants to see and that the ideologues surrounding the president want to see. They want a country where being white means that you're more American than everybody else. And they are implementing that ideology into law as we speak.
And Doug, I want to go to you and get a little bit of historical context on what we're seeing right now. Don Lemon's lawyer earlier this week, Abby Lowell, put what happened to Don in the context of some historical events. I want to play this this answer that he gave to Jen Psaki and then get your take on the other side.
What it means for everybody else is that we've seen today the next step towards what you would have thought if I described what happened, you were describing what happened in pre-World War II Italy with Mussolini. The first thing the Trump administration did was they attacked lawyers. Then they attacked the journalists. And those are the two playbook kinds of plays that authoritarian governments have done through history in order to stifle dissent.
We also had a number of guests on yesterday who made the point that what we're seeing now is also not that different than what a lot of people saw during the period of segregation and the civil rights movement. Can you lay out what we're seeing now and whether or not you feel like it's an anomaly?
Well, Operation Metro Surge is an anomaly of sorts. I mean, if you look at the visuals of what's happened over the past week and you see some of the confrontation, it does remind you of George Floyd in 2020. It does have echoes of some of the protests against police brutality in the 1990s. I really harken back to 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago because it really changed the way journalists started covering things. They were there just seeing who was going to be the Democratic nominee, Eugene McCarthy or Hubert Humphrey, and ended up getting tear gassed and arrested, billy clubbed. Dan Rather of CBS News was grabbed on the middle of the convention floor. This is all due to Mayor Daley's police and the calling in of the National Guard. Here in Minneapolis, in a similar way, you're seeing law enforcement officers that don't know what they're doing, wreaking havoc on the streets of Minneapolis. And it's going to be remembered as a flashpoint of modern history that we've already, the two dead in Minneapolis are martyrs. We have Bruce Springsteen come in and write the song about the streets of Minneapolis, and the whole country is saying we're proud of Minneapolis because they've stood up to know. And I think it's here that ICE has lost its reputation. It may need to be abolished. I'm not sure the name ICE holds up anymore as a trustworthy law enforcement immigration officers due to the killings that we witnessed there in the cold snow.
And let's widen the aperture even more. I remember there was a time when there was a talk about American exceptionalism, but it seems to me what's happening right now in America is not exceptional. In fact, it fits a pattern that we have seen in other countries, in other eras throughout history. How is what's happening in the United States, from your years of experience and years of reporting, how does it fit patterns we've already seen? And also, in answering that, how is the world looking at the United States now?
Let me answer that by first picking up on something that Adam just said about the MAGA Republicans, however you define them, seeing themselves as the only real Americans. We're the real Americans. We deserve to rule. We can bend the law. We can change the rules. We can we can spin conspiracy theories in order to stay in charge because we deserve that. That's a kind of language that you've heard in other declining democracies over the many years. I think many people have this idea that democracy falls in some kind of cataclysmic struggle and there are tanks in the street and there's a coup d'etat. But actually, most modern democracies, if you look at Venezuela, if you look at Turkey, even if you look at Russia, certainly if you look at Hungary, most of them end because a party comes to power that identifies itself as the only party that deserves to rule. And it identifies all of its enemies, its political enemies, its ethnic groups it doesn't like, as non-citizens, foreigners, unimportant. The language that President Trump used during the election campaign was, he talked about vermin. He talked about immigrants poisoning the blood of the nation. He talked about Kamala Harris and ordinary Democrats as radical left Marxists. So this kind of language, this way of thinking about America was built already into the election campaign, and it absolutely fits a pattern. It's a familiar way of ending democracy by making the argument that only your party deserves to win, and we see that happening, and we're watching it play itself out right now.
Everyone, you see in the bottom of your screen a most incredible panel of Anne Applebaum, Douglas Brinkley, Adam Sawyer,